we are in a war with a death machine in Canada, and our adversaries are not numerous, but they're very well connected and well integrated across the medical, the legal, and the government space. The other day we had Foley, who has a excellent pool of data on what's been happening, especially with the judges. So that's very interesting. But in any case, death is proposed as a positive benefit for all seriously ill and or disabled persons. That is really the key to this. It's not a question of choice. It used to be discussed in terms of choice, but it's not that anyway. It is death proposed by professionals as a positive benefit. And the ultimate goal of this program is to kill as many of these people as they possibly can. Now, that statement would obviously be contested by people saying that they had no such intentions. However, when you look at their actions in the judicial sphere and in the legislative sphere, they favor every category. Every time there's a question of a category, they favor it. Every method, every time there's a question of a method, they favor it. Every simplification, every ease in result, they're always on board with that. So either they consciously are with the program or they're ignorant of what they're doing, but the result is the same. And it's an interesting point because although there's a passive resistance, which I'll get to in a moment, in the medical sphere, the people who are on side with the program are very active, very deliberate, very conscious of what they're doing. The patients are actually hunted throughout palliative care at this time. It's an amazing thing that at the beginning, palliative care was seen as an alternative to medical homicide. And today, that's not at all the case. The two have been completely integrated. True palliative care has been actually chased out. So many of the professionals have been chased out. And it's an amazing fact that right now, 75% of all medical homicides are performed in palliative care. So palliative care itself has become the pipeline for medical homicide. And basically, the way this works is you get admitted to palliative care. You go to a hospital, they don't know what to do with you, they decide you're dying, they put you in palliative care. And the next thing you know is you have nurses coming on to you, poor dear, have you thought of, And it starts, I've actually looked at seminars on instructing nurses on how to do this, and it's really amazing. They really believe in what they're doing. Once again, the positive benefit. They believe that this is what is right for the patient. And in medical functioning, doctors and nurses are supposed to do what's right for the patient. So they could coax you to have a beneficial surgical operation. Well, they'll also coax you to have MAID. It's the same thing. And it's just amazing the scale of this. As I said, 75% of all the medical homicide now comes through that pipeline. Now, amongst other things, I mean, obviously this is moral, it's a horror show, but amongst other things, this is a straight up theft of the taxes that we've paid for healthcare because we want to be treated, not killed. And I believe that going forward, we have to understand the power of that argument because people put an amazing amount of money into healthcare. And what are they doing that for if at the end of the road, they're going to have death substituted for the care they expected? So that's a straight up theft. Now, as for what's going on now, the mental illness thing, some of you may be aware that we're waiting for a judgment from the committee, probably saying that they're not going to okay mental illness for 2027. We hope so. But they're not going to drop that because it is their gateway, one of their gateways to incompetent MAID. See, this whole thing about MAID has been constantly sold as a choice. It's your choice. It's your option. It's all of these things. But really, when you come back to the fundamental point of medical homicide as a medical treatment, as a objective benefit. Well, you can't deny that objective benefit to people who are incompetent. So basically, incompetent MAID is a huge part of this death machine program, which hasn't yet been fully confronted. But the points of entry are infanticide. Obviously, there's no capacity there. Mature minors, then you discuss whether or not children can be competent. And advance request, you know that the senior that you're putting down at the moment of putting him down is incompetent. Okay. But perhaps the most important of these was the one with mental illness, because they were saying the suffering of this person trumps the fact that possibly they're not capable, therefore we'll go ahead with it anyways. And that just opens the door to all incompetent medical homicide. Now, in what we're dealing with, we have government messaging control, which is very interesting. I come back to the constitution of the death lobby. As I said, you've got the judges, you've got the doctors, you have the politicians. They're all tightly integrated. And as Alex will tell you, they have basically given the control of the program to the medical professionals that are pushing it. So they're the ones that come up with the guidelines. They are the ones that they're the ones that produce the annual MAID report. And you can really see in the annual MAID report the tendencies shifting over time, But in any case, they misrepresent numbers in the provinces. At the beginning, they told us very clearly, what was going on with the different provinces. And then when they got to the point where they were giving us a ratio of how many people were dying by medical homicide with regards to all deaths. And lately, they haven't been doing that anymore. If you want to figure out that number, you have to go in deeper into the data and do the multiplication and division yourself. Otherwise, you can't find it out. And they project, well, they talk about under average, Under average, that means you think of, poor person, he's behind, he's dragging his feet, he doesn't know what he's doing, he's not up with modern times. Well, when they talk about the average, the Canadian, these are just, I'm not giving you the exact numbers, but just off the top of my head. The Canadian average in the last report was 5%. But the only provinces which actually achieved that average were Quebec and British Columbia. Okay. So basically, when they talk about under average, this is under average, this is under average. The whole country is under average except for 2 provinces. And that becomes important because in the messaging in the media, they have things like Manitoba, where they talked about Manitoba had an under average, a lower than average rate of approval. Yes, okay. But so did everybody else, except, as I said, British Columbia and Quebec. So basically, they're representing this as that the whole country is behind but that's what they say. They say under average. In actual fact, under average, the biggest province in Canada is Ontario. They have 40% of the population. Their MAID rate, is a little under 4%. Average is 5%. So you can see they're 25% under average. That's a huge difference, right? And that's where the center of gravity of the country is. So they're trying to represent this as being backwards bumpkins who must get up with the program. But in reality, what they're normalizing is much higher than what would be done. And they're doing it because, Quebec, they have the amazing number of 8% now. So that's what we're dealing with. Now, the next thing they do is they present MAID transfers as an unconscionable burden upon the patients. That means if you're in a facility that doesn't permit MAID, you have to be transferred out to have it, right? And they're saying that that's a terrible thing. So in the government data now, the number that they think that's important is not what percentage of patients are dying in any particular province. No, it's what percentage of patients in a particular province have been forced to transfer in order to have MAID. Not that they can't have it, but they've been forced to transfer. And they've got a court case going on in BC about this. It's a posthumous case. Some patient was transferred, and now the patient's family are all up in arms about what happened with that. And the idea is, if they get that case, then they won't have to change their law, because they have a law that they have to permit faith-based institutions to refuse MAIDs. So they have to pass that case. That case has got to succeed in order for the government to be obliged to change the law. You see, this is the program they've had all the way along.
Well, we're to force the faith-based
exactly
to do
it.
Yeah.
Exactly. But that they won't have to change the law to do that, because and as I said, that's their program. They get an activist judge decision, which apparently forces the government by fairness or constitutionality to change the law. And that's what we saw all the way along the line. But this is very important because, again, I go back to Manitoba. Manitoba has had exactly 2 articles about MAID since Christmas, and one of them is about how so many people in Manitoba have to be transferred, right? So basically, Manitoban death lobby are waiting on the decision in the court case in British Columbia so that they can lean on their people in Manitoba and get this change. And all of this comes around to the importance of Alberta. Because you see, Alberta, in a definite way, put their foot down and said, we're not going to do MAID in this case, in this case, in this case, in this case. Particularly, they're not going to oblige institutions to do MAID. And they don't talk about faith-based, which is very, very important, because we can't completely articulate our opposition on faith-based institutions. No, we have to be able to start ourselves, particularly palliative care institutions, without playing the faith-based card. We have to maintain that it's a medical professional necessity to have that sort of space. So anyway, you see how they've been doing this this legal game, and how even provinces that are don't even have active court cases, like Manitoba, are in the line of fire. And then along comes Alberta, and they say, no, we're going to actually pass legislation, and we're going to make this different. Well, that's the amazing, wonderful thing. But I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a basic media blackout on Alberta, because they have media controls everything, right? I mean, media controls, but the death lobby is part of the political cabal, which controls the media. So there's a blackout on the meaning and the importance of Alberta, and that's a serious thing. So we have to create more noise about that. They definitely are not going to talk about this fairly, about the burden of losing, the importance. We have to talk about the importance of protecting facilities which don't have MAID. Anyway, last point. People around me say, this is not what I see in my doctor. Or even, I went to the hospital and I was met by very nice people, and my mother was not fast-tracked into MAID. Okay, so that's wonderful. And it's true in a lot of cases. But it does not mean that we're not threatened. What it means is that this thing has not percolated. Basically, what you're seeing when you see a doctor who disapproves a MAID request, who does he goes through all the motions of and probably very seriously in all his soul and conscience, looking at the criteria and looking at the patient, and he doesn't approve the patient. When we know perfectly well that there's doctors right around the corner who will approve that same patient, absolutely same day.
Yeah.
Well, when we see that, what it means is that unstated and unrecognized, there's a real and generalized civil disobedience going on in medicine right now. And that's something that I just kind of saw it that way recently. I said to myself, it's really our job to nourish that disobedience, to make the doctors aware of the fact that that's what they're doing, that they are involved in an action of political disobedience in order to change this narrative. Okay, so now having gone through Canada, and it's very, very grim, I would like to switch to the United States, where it's like being in a time warp machine. You know, they're still talking about choice. They're talking about people are going to be coerced. You know, the vulnerable are going to be influenced. It's not that at all. It's a ground up system of managed death based. It's budget based, and it's veterinary medicine, and this is what the future is. So when you're discussing all this stuff about, the most vulnerable and all kind of that, or the disabled, even the disabled, the disabled is yesterday's news. I'm disabled. I got into that for that reason. Those were my arguments. That's the last go around with this thing was about the disabled. Now it's not about that anymore. It's about liquidating all of the expensive patients. And in the United States, it'd be important to come on to that. The thing is, in the United States, people have been depending on terminal condition and self-ingestion. And they're saying there's no movement on the slippery slope because nothing's happened with self-ingestion and nothing's happened with terminal condition. But that is not the whole story. They have been, in their laws, introducing other clauses which are bringing them ever closer to the Canadian reality. And the first of those is simply the whole idea of the MAID concept to begin with. Ideas and definitions are found upstream from policy. Okay. Assisted death apologists have invested great energy in choosing the words to cover what they want to do. And the most important is the medical aid in dying thing. And this was, not recognized, but in 2016, Colorado became the first American state to define the mechanics of assisted death under a specific term. Before that, they had no term, okay? They had no name for it. There was no name for the act. Well, Colorado stepped in with medical aid in dying in 2016, okay? Now, medical aid in dying is a very, very precise thing, internationally known as doctor-administered euthanasia of patients, whether they're dying or not, with suffering, whatever that would mean. And it doesn't matter if in the United States, Colorado has it only for terminal condition. If they put in the name medical aid in dying, that is their ultimate goal. There's no two ways to look at that. Now, since then, two others have used the same definition, which are New Mexico and New York, while two states use medical aid in dying in the name of their law, New Jersey and New York. And one state does both of these things, New York. And in addition to those, two other states use the phrase medical aid in dying in the preamble to their laws. That's Delaware, Illinois in 2025. And Illinois further defines aid in dying as an end of care option. Okay, deceptively dropping the hot button word medical, but achieving the same result by adding the word care. So you add that all up, there are 6 MAID states at this time. But more importantly, that number includes all of the latest 5, which is to say Colorado, New Jersey, New Mexico, Delaware, Illinois, and New York. So there can be no doubt of the conceptual shift from any of these ideas of end-of-life option, death with dignity, to MAID as a medical procedure. Okay, so that point is the name. The next is the entitlements and mandates. Okay, you don't have entitlements and mandates if you're talking about a choice or an option. Entitlements and mandates are the signature and mainspring of medically justified. They are the flip side of prohibition. They're policy instruments. You know, some things you suppress, some things you favorize. And that's what's happening here. And what are the entitlements? Well, the entitlement basically is that everybody is supposed to, in several states, okay, I won't keep look to tell you the exact names of the states, but you have a thing called the duty to inform, which we're very familiar with in Canada. Duty to inform means that your patient has to know that he's eligible. Well, what in the world is that? That's back to the doctors hunting the patient. Okay. They look at that patient and they decide objectively that patient is better off dead. Period. It's good for him to be dead, and I'm going to help him to do that. And then I'm going to tell his children, and his children are saying, Dad, Dad, take your insulin. Dad, take your whatever it is, medical holiday, take your poison, take it. It's good for you. And well, with the entitlements and mandates, you have a whole bunch of things about which institutions can refuse and under what circumstances. And it all comes back to less and less and less, because they are bolstering this idea that it's a good thing. Not that it's a choice or whatever, that it's a good thing for you. And basically, the only thing protecting the market in the United States right now is the strategy of the death lobby itself, because they've deliberately not touched terminal condition or self-ingestion, because they're trying to bring in other states, and they have to do it on a minimal level, and they have to promise that they're never going to do that. But then on the other side, you saw in California, they brought up a bill to do exactly that. They give almost the same conditions as in Canada. But they backed off that. They backed off that for strategic reasons, because they were worried about Illinois and New York, which are two big states which would not have passed if they'd done that. So basically, when they say there's no slippery slope and don't worry about it, everything is fine, as soon as they get to the point where they figure that their penetration has gone as far as it can go, which in their own strategic planning is about 2 years from now, then people like the bunch in California, they won't be able to rein them in anymore.
That's right.
And we'll go on to the next step. So that's quite obvious. So I would like people in the United States, I don't know how many Americans we have on this call, but I would like to start introducing this idea that you got to forget about choice, and you got to forget about betting everything on the disabled and people not having physical supports and all that. No, you have to look at this. Right now, we have a utilitarian system of managed death. Okay, I say that the foregoing description is not at all speculative. Not only are all doctors and hospitals no longer expected to minimize recourse to medical homicide, they are tasked with the prioritized promotion of that practice. Far from a mere defense of assisted death as personal choice, we're now witnessing the attempted establishment of a radical new death management policy whereby medical homicide is treated objectively, okay, as I said, as a positive benefit. The main thing, though, is that this proposition has never debated upon its own merits. It has been invasively exploited. The legal permissions which were allegedly granted for choice, so at first empowered by an idealized enthusiasm for personal freedom, it has distorted and displaced that impulse under the formidable and relentless economic pressures of collective utility. And first they came for the terminally ill. But I cannot get over this thing about how people have totally forgotten about the terminally ill. I mean, in Canada, even though we permit MAID for people who are not dying, only 4% of MAID is in that category. 96% of MAID is in the terminal category. And now we take that as normal. We say, oh, that's normal. You got your grandmother goes into the hospital. They don't know what to do with her. They put her in palliative care. The palliative care nurse says, oh, well, have you thought of MAID? I mean, it was supposed to be a few people who are terribly suffering. It's not that anymore. It's the pipeline. And for me, that's a scandal. That's a real scandal because they're stealing the last weeks and months of people's lives, normal people, the whole population. They're attempting to do it. And that to me, and as a disabled person, maybe I'll be an apostate, but to me, that's actually right now a very, 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 very serious thing. So I'll leave you with that. And I would say we have to just, with a couple of ideas, in Canada, we have to really raise the noise level on the fact that the medical profession is resisting, that we are pushing back, that we're winning in the court, that we're winning in the legislatures, and that we don't have to be led around by the nose by this little cabal of judges and senators and death doctors. We don't have to be. We can fight back. We can do it effectively. And in the United States, get out of that time machine. Go forward. Put it on the forward control. Look at what's happening in Canada and understand that there's nothing protecting you from that, and that the policy, the program is already being implemented. So I'll leave you with those thoughts.
Okay, so we're going to go to Kelsi, but what I did is I put the image on the screen because I was recently just developed, like literally recently developed by Amy Hasbrook and Nick Steenhout. It's actually also in French, but I thought I'd put one image up. I put it on my PowerPoint because obviously I have that up already. I'm going to delay my PowerPoint. We're going to go to Kelsi first. But can you all see the image? I thought it was quite well done. You see the death, the bodies on the right-hand side, and it says over 100,000 served. No waiting, same-day service. Use your own risk. Use at your own risk. Yes. Very good. Let's go to Kelsi.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much, Alex. That's a troubling photo, and I think that illustrates exactly where we're at. I think it's really hard to not get discouraged when we are in this consistent fight. And I know a lot of you have been in a lot longer than me, so I applaud your willingness to continue down this road. But here's what I will say from the media side of things, because that's where I kind of sit. I hope that everybody feels incredibly encouraged. And the reason being is Dying with Dignity and these organizations are sending out emails monthly stating that we've been able to, well, I guess they call us dis and misinformation, even though we have, we have proof of everything we say. But the good news is whatever is being done on that side of front is doing damage significantly to the movement. It's waking people up from this stupor that Canada has been sitting in for quite some time. And it's allowed people to really start to question out loud rather than just at the kitchen table privately to their loved ones. Is this okay? Should we be accepting this? And what I'm most encouraged about is the media is taking it seriously. I'm not talking about the liberal media in Canada. I'm not talking about CTV or Global or CTV or CBC. I'm talking about international media. I'm talking about Daily Mail. I'm talking about CNN and Fox, whether you want, it doesn't matter your political side. The fact of the matter is it's getting significant amount of attention on the more mainstream platforms like podcasts and in Substacks and in other journalist outlets. So the good news about that is it's made so much noise that they are no longer able to sit there and say that this is some beautiful way to die, some dignified way, and some painless way. We've now been able to crash every single one of those narratives, which is incredible because it has allowed people to start asking the right questions. Now, I'm very encouraged as to what we're about to see with Made for Mental Health. But that being said, as somebody who is 100% disabled, and I echo Gordon's concerns, just because a lot of us don't look disabled does not mean that we are not targets, and we absolutely are, especially our elderly population with the homelessness that we are seeing right now. You've seen that with the Tim Horton stories and things like that. The reason I bring it up is because I do actually, as much as it sounds like on a regular ongoing basis, do have hope that this will stop. And I actually do believe that we are on a path now that they can't stop. I'm very encouraged and excited, like I wrote in the chat. Whether you like him or not, I am going on Tucker Carlson in the next few weeks. And every single thing that is said in this chat and everything that is said forward, I'm going to be echoing so that the rest of the world will hear too. I'm really encouraged that Made for Mental Health will be stopped today, but I do know that with this new court case, it more than likely will be shoved through in a different manner. But I do think that as long as we keep going this direction, not only will we be able to stop MAID for mental illness, I think we'll genuinely in our lifetime be able to roll back all the way to track one. Now, I know some people believe track one should exist, and that is your right, but I will, for the rest of my life, make sure that this doesn't exist in this country. And I'm only 36, so I've got a minute. So I'm encouraged that we will get there, and I plan on doing this work for the rest of my life. Now, every single one of you who has done this work, I'm so grateful for you sharing your time and your efforts with me and Gordon and Alex, and you have been relentless. And if there is ever anything that I can do for you or help you or tell those stories, in the chat right before I jump here, I'm going to put my email address. I want you to use it. I don't want you to see it as a burden. I want you to write me and I want you to tell me what's going on and what you see and what you would like shared. And I will do my very best to make sure that your voice gets heard. Alex does one hell of a job on his blog, daily taking and fielding phone calls and emails. I just do things a little different. So if Alex is cool with it, I'll happily share my email address. So hopefully we can feel like we're a banded together, because sometimes I know I feel a little out of reach, but I'm not. And I want you guys to feel like you guys can use me as your vessel as well. Okay. So I'll put that in there now. And thank you and God bless all of you for all of this work, because I do believe we will stop it and roll it back. And we will make sure that those 100,000 plus people who were coerced into ending their lives earlier than they should have, or been told they were burdens, will never, ever, just like the rest of my veteran friends, go unheard, unsaid. Stories will never not be told, and we will make sure that their lives were worth everything that they should have been. They were just cut too short.
So I think things are changing. I think things are changing for a couple of reasons. We've seen it worldwide. When Scotland defeated their assisted suicide bill, you have to understand how big that was, because when the bill was first presented, they have the same political system as we have. So when the bill was first presented, it passed at second reading by a vote of 70 to 56. Then it went to committee. The Scottish assisted suicide bill was defeated 69 to 57. It has a lot to do with Canada. These stories like Cano dying are absolutely horrific and sad. You know, just think about Margaret, Cano's mother, and how much pain she's gone through losing her son, who was diabetic. He was originally approved in 2023 to die at the Maid House, which is the euthanasia clinic in Ontario. He was eventually killed by Dr. Ellen Wiebe, and I should remove the word, the DR in front of Ellen Wiebe. She's not a doctor, in my opinion. Nonetheless, these type of stories have made a big difference throughout the world. When the House of Lords, kept on debating their euthanasia bill and held it up long enough that it died. When Slovenia overturned, what does it mean to be coerced? I think we have to ask this question, because coercion is an important question, because people say, oh, no one's being coerced. I was contacted by a woman who was upset about the death of her nephew. He was in his 50s. He was never married and had multiple health issues. She spoke to him a few days before his death, and during the conversation, she realized that he was going to be dying by euthanasia. He told her that he wanted to live. He told her he wanted to live. So being offered euthanasia is common. Every major hospital in Canada has a MAID team that not only approves and carries out the death, but they also offer death. After his death, an immediate family member called her concerning the death. The family member described the death with glowing language. We hear that all the time. Oh, it was so beautiful. You should have been there. It was wonderful. It was beautiful, his death. When she said that the nephew recently told her that he wanted to live, the immediate family member responded by saying it was for the best. Was this coercion? He wanted to live. So we know it was legalized in 2021. We know that the law gave physicians and nurse practitioners the right in law to kill you. That's what it did. It gave them total legal coverage to be able to kill you. The law was expanded in March 2021 by removing the terminal illness requirement. They removed the 10-day waiting period. They permitted euthanasia for mental illness alone, which then they delayed, which now this committee today is going to come out with a report saying that we shouldn't do mental illness, euthanasia for mental illness alone. I'm going to tell you right off the bat, we should be concerned about Canada's Senate. Remember, the euthanasia for mental illness alone came out of Canada's Senate. And if you're going to read the report today, you're going to notice that there's a dissenting report that's supposed to come out from 3 of the senators on the committee saying how terrible this is, that we're not going to be killing people with mental illness alone. It's got to pass the Senate also, Bill C-7 passed on March 2021, created this two-tier law, which meant a 90-day waiting period for people who don't have a terminal condition, but people who do have a terminal condition can die immediately. And you see in the image, you have Catherine Friesen and another person who actually I wish I knew, but I don't know. And they're saying, why us? And they're absolutely right, because the tier 2 euthanasia is really defined by disability. It's absolutely correct. Health Canada reporting, well, you've seen the numbers go up, 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 up. I estimate that last year we had 17,700 euthanasia deaths. I base that on the Ontario data, the Alberta data, and data I have out of Quebec. But also, if you look at it, the percentage increase in 2025 in Ontario was for 4% increase again. If you extrapolate that across the country, that would bring us somewhere, and the numbers do change in every province, but if you look at the Alberta data, et cetera, I'm estimating we're probably going to be around 17,700. If you think Alex is just drawing straws, last year I estimated that we would end up at 16,500. When the report came out, it said 16,499, so I was up by 1. Now, of course, every death is important. Quebec's latest number said that they were at 8% of all deaths. It's only going to go up. It's only going up. It's a terrible situation. It's what got in Canada. It's affecting the world. But you get these stories like Jolene Van Alstyne. This affected the U.S. more than you think. A woman in Saskatchewan has a treatable medical condition, but she cannot get treatment in Saskatchewan for her condition. She was approved for euthanasia until Glenn Beck got involved in it. And then she changed. Well, she didn't actually want to die by euthanasia at all. She just said she couldn't continue living the way she was living. She did receive treatment in the U.S. Amir Farsu was only homeless. These are stories that went worldwide. The case of the Alberta young woman who was 27 years old and autistic, MV, that court case. That court case was absolutely shocking to all of us. What was more shocking was that there was nothing that the court was willing to do to actually prevent that death. The only reason that MV was not killed by euthanasia was the fact that the judge pointed out that he was really concerned about the role of Alberta Health Services in that decision to approve her. And also, she was approved based on an unknown cause of pain. Unknown cause of pain. These are, I'm going to pass them. These are all medical treatment questions. Veterans, the veteran story. Well, you just had Kelsi talking about some of this because she's a veteran. But when you have Veterans Affairs telling people that they should have euthanasia, that went worldwide. That story went worldwide. It embarrassed our government, but more so even how it affected Christine Gauthier, a retired Canadian soldier, Paralympic athlete who was asking for help with a wheelchair lift. She needed a wheelchair lift, and she was told by Veterans Affairs, "Madam, if you're really so desperate, we can give you medical assistance in dying now." These stories went worldwide, but these stories have also affected Canadians. Not enough yet. Not enough yet. The story is important. This story of Joan Rowaway was not told by too many. I've told the story because it showed up in, actually it was the BC Catholic that actually published the story. And it seems ridiculous, but sadly, it's true. Joan Rowaway, her family was threatened by the BC Health Authority to have their mother taken from them. They were accused of denying their mother her right to die. So the story from the family and from Joan was that Joan never believed in euthanasia, but she was speaking to her oncologist about further treatment, and the oncologist was saying there's no further treatment for her. That was not the issue, whether or not she should receive treatment. During that discussion, the family said that Joan was partially sedated. The oncologist took the discussion about MAID, which was going on while she was being told there's no further treatment, as a request for euthanasia. So when the Fraser Health Authority representative contacted them saying, "We're coming to pick up your mother for her May death," and the family said there is no May death here, there's no euthanasia being requested here, they actually sent 2 people over to the house to pick up Joan, and the family wouldn't let them in. And then they sent another authority over who actually asked Joan if she wanted euthanasia, and she said no. These are the kind of things you get, as crazy as it is. Why would the health authority have to be that aggressive? Like, why is this necessary? It's because they drank the Kool-Aid. Chief Coroner of Ontario had put together this May Death Review Committee. Now, the May Death Review Committee has been changed, so I guess they weren't happy with the information that was coming out of the May Death Review Committee. But the May Death Review Committee was not only looking at these different deaths, but they were reporting some of the stories. But what you needed to know is between 2018 and 2023, 428 non-compliant euthanasia deaths happened in Ontario. And as Gordon already explained, Ontario doesn't have as high a euthanasia rate as some other provinces. I'm assuming that we've never seen an official report submitted from British Columbia, but I'm assuming British Columbia, with their high euthanasia rate, probably has a huge number of non-compliant deaths. One of the stories was about Mr. A. I'm not going to get into the story. I'm just going to say that Mr. A had reaction to his SARS vaccine. He had a fibromyalgia type reaction. He went through depression, so he was going through physical pain as well as depression. He was approved for euthanasia. His psychiatrist even pointed out that he had suicidal ideation, somatic symptom disorder, etc., etc. But the point was he was approved for euthanasia. He died by euthanasia, and in the autopsy, what did they find? No pathological findings were found at the postmortem. So first of all, the doctors had said that they couldn't find anything wrong with him, but he did have pain and symptoms, so he was approved. They did kill him. In his autopsy, they found nothing wrong with him. This is out of the Ontario coroner's report. This kind of stuff is unbelievable if you think about it. Man diagnosed, I'm not going to get into all these ones. There was another one about Mrs. B in her 80s who had explicitly stated that she, during the MAID assessment, that she wanted palliative care. She even made the comment that she was opposed to euthanasia based on her religious and personal views. So that's during her MAID assessment. She's saying this. Yet, what happened is that her husband was the caregiver. She was asking for palliative care. There was no palliative care space for her. She went home. Her husband then was being her caregiver, was going through caregiver distress. He contacted the MAID coordination service, who got his wife assessed again. She was assessed and approved. She ended up coming into the hospital again because of the fact that they had had a bad night. Caregiver burnout. He contacted the MAID coordination service. She was assessed and approved and died the same day by euthanasia. And so this is out of the coroner's report pointing out that in her first MAID assessment, she was quite clear she wanted palliative care. She didn't want MAID. She didn't want euthanasia. She even said it was against her personal beliefs. Think about this stuff. That case did hit the media too. It was covered. It ended up being covered later, but nonetheless. So we have to look at all these things about this. Now, I mentioned about the MAID Death Review Committee. So what happened is in 2026, this year, the Chief Coroner of Ontario decided to change the MAID Death Review Committee. The original committee had 15 members on it. 3 of them were people who were, how would you say, opposed. And he decided to remove those who were opposed. So future reports will only be looking at the deaths. They're only going to be reviewing them. There will not be an issue of opposition. The parliamentary committee is coming out with that report today on euthanasia for mental illness. You have to remember that in February 2023, that same committee came out with a report supporting mature minors for euthanasia and by advanced request. Anyway, the Quebec College of Physicians had presented to that committee when it was deliberating on these issues, and they had said that they not only supported euthanasia for mature minors, but also for newborns, which is infanticide. Now, I put down here life unworthy of life. If you understand history at all, I'm referring to the Second World War, because the Germans killed thousands and thousands of people based on the concept of life unworthy of life. And I believe this is what we're talking about here. Anyway, Krista Carr stated to the Finance Committee in October 2024. Krista Carr is the head of the CEO of Inclusion Canada. This was on an unrelated matter. They were asking her about financial concerns of people with disabilities in Canada, and she responded, "People with disabilities are now very much afraid in many circumstances to show up in the healthcare system with regular concerns because often MAID is suggested as a solution to what is considered to be intolerable suffering." That happens to be caused by some of the things that the committee addresses, like poverty and the situations that people with disabilities disproportionately find themselves in compared to other Canadians. So here she's talking about issues related to finance at the Finance Committee, and she's bringing up how people with disabilities are feeling threatened in Canada because of MAID. Anyway, The Canadian Euthanasia Committee, I did present to it on May 5th, so I was very fortunate to have that opportunity. What were the key deciding factors? I think one of the key deciding factors was that the heads of psychiatry at 13 Canadian medical schools called on the federal government to not allow this. I think that was very important. Not to say that other psychiatrists who made comments to the committee were not important. I thought that was quite important. The letter from the 90 disability groups, which included Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, to the committee, asking them to not do this, to not go that way. And I think this has been very important. This is, to me, only the first issue. Now, we do have this Bill C-218 before us. It received its first hour debate on December 5th. I said here, no, I didn't update the screen, sorry. It has not received its second hour debate yet. I have contacted Tamara Jansen about Bill C-218. Now that the committee is coming out with this report, when will Bill C-218 go to a vote? It'd be nice for it to go to a vote sooner than later. This bill would actually reverse euthanasia for mental illness in our law. I get the feeling, though, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, that the Liberal government isn't going to support Bill C-218. What they're going to do is they're going to come up with their own legislation. And they wouldn't want to give that victory to Tamara. I think that that's what's going to happen. Now, maybe I'm just a skeptic. Maybe I'm wrong. I think, though, nonetheless, that's probably what they're going to do. And so what's going to be concerning to UI and everyone is what the language of the actual government bill will actually say. Okay. Euthanasia for mental illness is a serious issue because of issues of consent, but it's also not to say that I'm opposed to all killing. I'm opposed to killing people. But Dr. Sonia Gain testified that it's impossible to predict whether mental illness conditions are irremediable. That's fundamental. So you'd be killing someone who might be able to recover. And I think that's exactly what we're doing already anyway. Now, Gordon referred to the case of Claire Brasseau. So right now, Dying with Dignity is supporting the Claire Brasseau court case, which was filed a little while back. I think it was filed on May the 4th. This is a case I think that they filed because they were afraid that the government was going to reverse the euthanasia for mental illness issue, and so they thought they were just going to force the courts to go with them. I don't actually think they're going to win this case because Euthanasia Prevention Coalition is intervening in the case. Now that I've been reading the documents and everything from Dying with Dignity, I don't think they actually have a case that's winnable. It would have to take not only an activist judge, but a judge that not only wants this, but really wants this in order to approve this. Claire Brasseau is arguing that the case is only about her, that she has an irremediable psychiatric condition. She's not going to ever get better. She's suffering, suffering, and suffering, and she deserves to be killed. But Claire can't say that. It's impossible for her to say that because the fact of it is that if Claire can be killed, then then everyone who has a long-term mental illness could also be killed. So whatever's happening with this court decision, it's not about Claire, it's about everyone. But Claire is defined the case, and Dying with Dignity is defined the case that it's only about Claire. Now, for your information, the Rodriguez case was done the same way. This is an emergency case. That's how it was done. If you read the articles about it, Dying with Dignity launched an emergency case to the court concerning Claire Brasseau based on her suffering. Okay, that's exactly what Sue Rodriguez did in 1992. It was an emergency case, just so you know. So what's next? Parliament has never reviewed the law. They've never reviewed the law. On May 5th, when I made that comment before the parliamentary committee, Senator Senator Martin agreed with me. She then, when she asked me a question, she said, "You're right, Mr. Schadenberg, the law has never been reviewed, even though Bill C-14, the original law, required it." If you looked at the original Bill C-14, you notice the original bill required the review to begin in June of 2020. It was to be completed by June of 2021. Never happened. Now, why do we want to review the bill? Review the law? Because we want to talk about all the things that are actually happening. The government doesn't give us that opportunity in and of itself. The media does not give us that opportunity in and of itself. But if a committee were actually looking at the law and actually looking at a proper review, then all these stories would come out. And there's more stories out there. There's a lot more stories out there. They would, the other side is always saying, "Oh, there's been 1%." Like they look at the Ontario data and they say, "Oh, there's about 1% non-compliance." Well, actually, it's worse than that if you consider its self-reporting system. But nonetheless, they're arguing about it's only 1%. Well, if you're one of the 1%, you should be concerned. Nonetheless, the law has not been reviewed. If the law gets reviewed, there'll be a lot of stories coming forward. Parliament has reviewed expansions of the law, but it has not actually reviewed the law. It must be a complete review of the law that they do. It must be an honest, straightforward, complete review of the law. And I think that would help us. I know that Inclusion Canada is fighting to reverse track 2 so that the law would then not allow euthanasia for people who aren't terminally ill or don't have a terminal condition. And of course, I hope that they're successful in that. But I think that if we do a complete review of the law, that would help with reversing certain parts of the law. From 2021 to 2024, there was 2,050 Canadians who died through track 2 euthanasia, meaning that they weren't terminally ill. In 2025, the concluding observations on Canada, the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities called on Canada to repeal track 2 euthanasia, halt the planned expansion to mental illness, and bring its euthanasia regime into compliance with Canada's obligations under the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. For your information, they also said the same thing to the Netherlands. It's not just Canada. Nonetheless, Canada's law is certainly horrific. I will get into one other thing here, and that is what the law actually says. I should say to you, and if you haven't heard this before, everyone who's heard me speak has heard me say this before. The law only requires doctors and nurse practitioners to be of the opinion that you fit the criteria of the law. This is insanity. So once you're dead, let's say a family member is very upset that you're dead because they said, how did so-and-so ever get approved? How did that happen? This is just insanity. How did this happen? And then when they start asking questions, they realize there is complete and total legal freedom for doctors and nurse practitioners to kill you in Canada. And there's no way to get them for that, to stop them. There's no way. Once there's 2 signatures in the form, that's it. There's nothing else that can be done. And we know that also from that Nova Scotia case we were involved in several years ago. EPC got involved in the case in Nova Scotia where a woman was claiming that her husband was incompetent. In the end, he died by euthanasia. The judge said that there's nothing in the law that would allow him to prevent this death. There was nothing in the law that would give him the right. He would have to be an activist judge to have done so, in other words. Like the Netherlands and Belgium, Canada is debating the expansion of euthanasia to children, to incompetent people. Euthanasia by advance request is what? It's euthanasia for people with dementia. Quebec allows euthanasia by advance request. I'm very worried that the federal government will prevent euthanasia for mental illness, but allow euthanasia by advance request. I'm very worried that that's what's going to happen. We haven't seen the language of any bill yet, but that's what I'm worried about. We're talking about incompetent people, people with Alzheimer's, dementia. They're already talking about things like how terrible it is that we can't kill people with dementia who never asked for it. There's only one clear in the lines in the sand. There's only one clear line in the sand, and that's prohibiting killing. Once you allow killing, all these things are now negotiable because the question of killing is off the table. That's already approved. The only question remaining is who does the killing and for what reason? And there's more information about us. And as I say, we are intervening in the Brasseur case. Hopefully there's a judge who's reasonable, who reads through the case and decides to toss it quickly. But I have fear that the government might not overly strongly defend the law. Because if the government is saying that they don't want to actually allow euthanasia for mental illness alone, is it because that they see the political ramifications of that? Or is it because they actually believe that? I don't know yet. I don't know, and I'm not going to make that judgment for them. Are there any questions?
Just a couple of comments. I was talking to somebody on Monday that has had almost a fight with her lawyer to not have a statement in her will that says, because I fear the pain and suffering of illness and death, I want euthanasia. Have you seen that? Like the lawyer was insisting that that has to be in her will. And I don't know if you know anything about that, whether
in her will, the problem is that's not technically legal outside of Quebec now. So what they're talking about is adding euthanasia by advanced request, right? And you realize that. So if people put it in their will now, then if it were to become legal, then it would be legally applicable. That's not much different than what exists already, because in the template power of attorney for personal care document in Ontario. It uses very similar language, but it's not about MAID. It's about saying no to any, any treatment, only allowing pain and symptom management or whatever it would say. You know what I'm getting to? So it's not very different from the language that exists in Ontario already under that concept. So
Okay, and just one other thing is the experience I'm having locally, and I'm in Guelph, it's not a huge place, but I've got 5 families now that I have gone through where their loved ones have been more or less offered MAID, and they've spent the last days, sometimes, couple of weeks, others, with the grief of losing the person they love, but also fighting the hospital and fighting people. And it seems to me that their stories that need to be out there for people, that this idea of killing the medical homicide, and this language of that they're MAID deaths. They're not MAID deaths, they're MAID killings. And you've got, families in the middle of this war, in the middle of a time that is one of the most difficult for all families, losing a loved one. How do we address that, if we do at all?
Jackie, the problem is that they've got these MAID teams in the hospital, and they're absolutely convinced that they're sharing this wonderful news with people that you probably qualify for MAID. Or in fact, if they look at someone who's actually terminally ill, as you know, they can have a same-day death. So if they were to request it, they would carry it out. It would be done that same day even. So they're really quite aggressive about it. And when you hear comments, not only from Dr. Ellen Wiebe, and I shouldn't use doctor, and we've heard these comments, and we've all know these comments where these doctors are talking about how this is the most beautiful thing they've ever done in their life, and they're trying to share this beauty with the rest of us. It's insanity if you think about it, that what they're doing. They're proselytizing the concept of killing, and that's part of the problem.
Yeah, but no, the thing is, though, this is the definition of it.
Yep.
What's important is that these people cannot be stopped, because they are the ones who are faithfully representing a true reflection of how the concept is made. And the whole thing, I think that it's about messaging. We have to message. It's the idea. These are not isolated incidents. That's the point. It's systematic. The doctors of the MAID teams are hunting the patients, and it is being done as a realization of actual policy. And that's a messaging that we have not yet gotten into properly disseminating, because we've still been working on the idea of coercion of choice and so forth. But it's not coercion of choice. It's a direct, straight up proposition. I mean, normal people, especially when they're at the very end of life and they're in a very fragile condition for all kinds of reasons, and they're only half there mentally to begin with, and their doctor says, "This is the best thing for you, buddy. Please sign here." I mean, it's a slam dunk. They should not have the right to do that, but they do. Not only do they have the right, they now have the obligation and duty.
Right.
So
and dead people don't complain because they're dead.
Well, that's the catch-22, is that there is no method of recourse because it's in the parameters of the law. It's justified by definition. If the person said yes, that's it. They were terminal. They said yes. What are we talking about? They say.
And let's be brutally honest. Okay, so why did Slovenia win? And I make Rachel has a hand up. We'll go to you next. Why did Slovenia win? I think it's very important. They won based on a couple things. Language was fundamental to their campaign. They talked about this as poison. I think that was accurate, but they also made it very clear this was a form of healthcare reform, pension reform, and social service reform. Because obviously, dead people don't cost money in the medical system. Dead people don't collect retirement benefits, and dead people don't collect disability benefits. And they were absolutely correct. And as Aleš had said out of Slovenia, it was hard language, but it was true. And that's why they won, because they were willing to say the truth. Rachel, you can unmute yourself. Happy to hear you.
I'm wondering where things are currently as far as infanticide goes, and how that may apply to people who are deemed incompetent by doctors or other professionals against their will. I've suffered with mental illness. I started life with being denied hospital access and 6 weeks of anoxia. And in the Quebec health system, I've experienced a lot of racism. There are a lot of bullies out there just looking for people to pick on. And I'm one of these people who will fawn. So I basically can be coerced into saying whatever they want me to say to get them to stop. And I'm actually getting to the point where I think I may be able to go back to work now that I'm in my early 60s. Because I've, about 8 years ago, I was identified with CPTSD as opposed to what I was diagnosed with by a doctor who has now lost his license for the third and final time with bipolar, because he diagnosed my brother with bipolar, who has autism. He was late diagnosed by Queen's University about 5 years ago with autism. He was even more abused than I was. And, he's in and out of the mental ward because he's still trauma bonded. So, he suffers from multiple personality and like stuff like that hasn't even, it hasn't even reached the discussion, because, what do you do with somebody who one of them wants to die and has been trying to kill off my brother for his whole life? And, so you get, I know personally people who had to spend a lot of time in mental wards, and they like to keep the ones who are compliant and easy. But honestly, if I ever had to go to a mental ward, I would rather die. And, what's being done about all that? So I guess the main thing gets back to the initial thing. What are they currently doing as far as passing infanticide when it's incompetence? There's no way that they can answer. But, does the patient even have something that they're supposed to sign? Or is it just two professionals sign for them and then off they go?
The whole thing about euthanasia for mental illness being reversed is something that would actually protect many people then. But the fact of it is they haven't legalized euthanasia for newborns yet, or for children yet. That didn't happen. What happened is the committee suggested that we legalize euthanasia for mature minors. The government never did that yet. They just haven't done it. I shouldn't use the word yet because I'm hoping they never do it. It was the Quebec College of Physicians that thought we should have euthanasia of newborns. And once again, that's straight out eugenics without a question. There's no other way to describe it. And not to say that eugenics is limited to that, but that's straight out eugenics.
One of the things that I think people need to be aware of is the medication that they're using. I mean, it's not like Soylent Green where you go in and, you're watching a movie and peaceful music and you just all of a sudden die. And I don't think people understand the complications that can arise for having that. And you know me, Alex, I am, pro-life all the way. So I think the cases that you showed are shameful for Canada and United States. We have made in, 12 plus DC states, but we also have hospice, and hospice is doing it every day under the guise of comfort care. And a lot of people don't realize that. So we're in trouble as a country, Canada, as well as United States, Australia, United Kingdom. All of us need to band together and advocate and protect our loved ones.
So Marcia, as you might have noticed, that case that came to the media, I don't know if you saw it. I certainly sent it out with the blog articles. The case here is actually in Beachville, Ontario, so right near London. So the doctor who did the approval at the Tim Hortons coffee shop is also the same doctor who did that killing where he declared the person to be dead, but they weren't dead. He left. And then, of course, the family was all shocked that the guy continued to breathe and the rest of it. Anyway, that case, actually, you can see in the information that he had reused the a previous kit left over from a previous killing kit. But they describe how the death occurs. And it's exactly what the other side, they keep saying this isn't true, but yet you read exactly the description of the death that came out of the report, and it's exactly as they say. So, it's not what people think. You're right about that. Absolutely.
Right.
And as for palliative care, I wish we had good palliative care where somebody actually cared for your pain and symptoms, allowed you to die a natural death. But the problem with this whole issue,
Alex, I think that paradoxically, this is really the solution for palliative care, because if you separate palliative care from medical homicide and what Marcia is talking about, which is basically stealth euthanasia. So you have the stealth, and you say, no, we want, and then you get voluntary. We're not saying that it's a law saying all palliative care facilities have to be this, but people who want can create palliative care in which they say, we do not practice euthanasia and we do not practice stealth euthanasia. Then you develop a division. Then the patient as consumer starts to look at options, and starts demanding better care at some point in time, hopefully. So I think it actually is a step forward, strangely, paradoxically, that it clarifies things and it can allow a housekeeping within palliative care.
I'm part of sort of a seniors group here. I just joined only a couple of months ago by accident, actually. And beginning of June, they decided to have somebody speak on end-of-life decisions. So they spoke about the different wills and all that, and it was going pretty good, but they also said they were going to speak on MAID. And so my friend and I went there, and things were going along fairly well as they spoke about how to make up your will and all that. And then one woman just stood up and she says, I want to know more about MAID because I want to make sure my family knows exactly what I want. And everything just went crazy because people were very interested. And the presenter was somebody that I had been working for at the time as a private healthcare aide. And she said, oh, yes. She says, I've been to some amazing end of life, MAID. And she just spoke so highly of it, and everybody was, and my friend and I were just like feeling sick. I approached the presenter and I said, I can't work for you anymore because it's a conflict of interest. And also, I know that there was interest that they were going to try to bring in somebody to speak about MAID. So I know it's going to be from a very pro-MAID group because they were speaking about dying with dignity.
Paul wanted to say something too, so go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that here in the Ottawa Valley, we've got an initiative here where we're trying to mobilize people to provide an option for MAID, which would just be companionship, care, friendship. And we're using the model of compassionate community care. Good training by Kelsi Sheren Saturday. Service in worship services in nursing homes and seniors homes, residences. I've just gone to the top and said, I'd like to do a presentation on pro-life, on how the benefits of palliative care and the dangers of assisted suicide. And I've been welcomed into two nursing homes in our community, and then two others are still well. Come and speak.
I'm in North Battleford, Saskatchewan, and we have Denise Schmidt, who has worked with Horizons of Hope. And last night we saw the video that Alex and a lot of you were on, and it's amazing. But Horizons of Hope takes, obviously, the Christian perspective, And I live in a seniors place here, and we have so many people that are on both sides of the fence. So I think we really need to pray for one another. That's all I was going to say.
The Commonwealth Heads of Government Summit meets every year and is meeting this year. And I wondered about whether we could try and encourage some of the countries in the Commonwealth to call out Australia and Canada.
Where's that meeting going to be held?
I can't remember where. I think it's somewhere in the Caribbean this summer. Yeah, it's one of the Caribbean islands.
That's a very interesting idea.
It struck me that we need sort of solidarity in the Commonwealth, and you know, because they can expel countries from the Commonwealth for human rights violations, and I would think that might be worth people in Canada and Australia pursuing with colleagues in other countries in the Commonwealth.
Yeah. Have you thought of any countries which you thought might be on side with our position?
Well, most of the African ones would be.
Yeah.
And probably most of the Caribbean ones. And obviously it'd be quite helpful from our point of view in the UK as well, because if there was a bit of a row about it at the Commonwealth Heads of Government Summit this year, it would help us in the UK resist the push here as well.
Yeah. No, I've been very disappointed with the attitude of what I would call the British diaspora. You know, it's they've all been coming on one after another. The last one is South Africa. South Africa appears poised to go the same way now. Well, I guess if that's it then, folks, we'll call it a day. But thank you very much for coming.